everyone. So today I'm going to cover the round seven games from the Candidates Tournament. I'm going to look at the games between Ian Nepomniachtchi and Richard Rapport, and Fabiano Caruana and Tamer Radjabov. I'm going to look at the Caruana Radjabov game first, because I've shown Nepo a lot on this channel, and I mean he's having a great tournament, but we kind of want to see something different. So I'm going to start with this game first. So e4, c5, knight f3, a6. Already a very odd move. And a lot of Sicilians, I guess this makes sense. a6 is just always there. And white has a lot of ways to play against this. And I think that Radjabov played this as a way to take Fabiano out of his prep. I mean, Fabiano literally knows everything in terms of chess openings and different theoretical lines, and I think a6 was just a way to thwart him. So Fabiano played c4. This makes complete sense. White wants to establish this thing called the Maroczy bind, where he tries to control d5, maybe play d4 at some point, and just have a very tight grip on the center. So knight c6, d4 anyways. And now e5. Now, you really don't want to take this knight. You just give the queen an amazing position on the board. It's not necessary here. Excuse me. Knight f6 is a move, but, this just gives white what he wants. White gets a very good game. So e5. And this sort of looks like a Kalashnikov, but with the moves c4 and a6 inserted. And where knight b5 is not a thing. So knight f5 instead. Now you don't have to play like this. You could just play knight c2. And the game can go on bishop c5, knight c3, d6, bishop e2, and white's fine here, honestly. It hasn't been played in a lot of games, but it's been played in a good handful, and white seems to be doing okay there. But instead he went for knight f5, which makes sense. And now d5. So takes. Now the knight's hid, but black can just take this knight. If this is taken, then queen takes, and then this pawn falls. And if you take again, this is actually not ideal for white, because yes, although white has arguably a more open space, and he's fine, he has lost castling rights, and this g2 pawn is a problem. Black, on the other hand, also has active bishops. The rook can come into the game, the knight can come in very easily. Black can castle, bring the other rook in. Black can even just play king e7, bring the other rook in this way. So not really what white wants. Instead, you just take this bishop. Now the knight is hanging, so the knight moves forward. And bishop d3. And in prior games, knight c3 was seen as a move. And usually the games went knight f6, bishop d3, and then taking here. And it's a very different game. But here bishop d3 was played. Queen takes d5. Now, in other games prior to, I think queen takes d5 was only seen in a couple of games. Knight f6 was seen before. And this is the game between Wesley So and Artemiev. And it went like this, where basically the problem here for black, I think, was this pawn. And after all these exchanges here, Artemiev actually had a pretty decent game here. He was completely fine and managed to hold everything together and eventually won. Even though white does seem okay, these knights are active, this pawn is, although it looks like it's hanging, I'm pretty sure there are some tactics involved. I didn't really look at this game that much. But anyways, yeah, so the point is that this is a double pawn structure, and maybe black can play against this f-pawn at some point. Although I actually do sort of prefer white, I think, at the moment. But anyways, let's go back. So queen takes d5 was played instead of knight f6, just taking the pawn immediately. Knight c3. And now let's move queen d7. Attacking f5 again. Honestly, I was thinking here bishop b4. Looks very natural. After castles, well, actually, upon speaking to my good wise friend the computer, it turns out that this isn't actually that good, because after queen e2, this pawn is weak. Bishop c4 might come. This rook might come in the middle. Bishop a3 might come. Bishop g5. Because black doesn't have the bishop pair, especially his dark squared bishop, The dark squares around the center, and in general the whole position for black, are actually really weak. So, for example, knight f6 and then bishop g5, and it's really annoying because white can take this at some point. So it's really not an ideal setup for black. Something like this, but now look, we're threatening like this move, for example. We're threatening maybe bishop e4 at some point, maybe just taking. Really not ideal for black, especially because he has like no bishops to cover any of his squares. So queen d7 makes some sense. And white just castles. Now knight f6. Bishop g5, this makes a lot of sense. Just getting ready to capture this at any moment. And now rook e1. This is a very simple play. Just attacking the e-pawn. And I'm not really sure how black can go about defending this. If something like bishop d6, I mean, this could just be taken. And then knight here. And this is weak. And it's just a very uncomfortable position to play. Really not something black wants. He really doesn't want to castle queenside, but we'll see what happens in the game. Because rook c1 might come, the queen might join the game. Not on b3, of course. Not on. Well, at some point. Obviously, the pieces are covering all the squares. But at some point in time, white might have a very serious attack going on there. So I don't think that's really ideal. Instead, Radjabov played castles, which looks pretty crazy to me. I mean, it does hang a pawn, but the other thing is, I mean, he could have also just castled kingside. Like, for example, he could have even played knight f6. Knight c6, sorry. After taking, I mean, yes, the pawn is defended, but at least this is some sort of game. I still think white's better here, simply because I think he has, this pawn is kind of gripping back black's kingside, and I think with something like f3, g4, white can start a real initiative on the kingside. Yeah, and I mean, this knight can come into the game. Knight c7 might be a thing. You could even take here. I still think white is better, but I think it's much better than what Radjabov did. You could even play castles kingside. At least not putting this king in the line of fire of potential of white's pieces. So let's say after taking, you know, this is a possible position, but at least in this case, the rook's under center. This knight's pretty active. I mean, black's pieces aren't terrible. Yes, he's down a pawn. But at the same time, white has this basically like undefended pawn as well. This rook is defending it for the moment, but you never know. That pawn might be weak at some point. But anyways, Radjabov just played castles queenside, which to me looks insane. Because these are serious weaknesses here. The king is pretty exposed. And his pawn hangs anyways. So Caruana just took it. I think doing this against Caruana is pretty... I don't want to say outlandish, but not wise, because you're giving someone like Caruana a pawn with an exposed king. I don't think that's an ideal way to play against someone like that. But I'm not 2700, so what do I know? So knight c6, just hitting the rook away. White is going to eventually play rook c1, so knight c6 makes sense, just blocking that file and hitting the rook. So takes. Now, yeah, if takes and takes, and white is doing great here. This bishop is going to plop on g3, rook c1, and you can call it game over. I mean, white's pieces look beautiful here. So that's not ideal. Obviously, you also don't want to give up two pieces for a rook. So it takes. And now just rook d5, very simple, hitting the queen. Queen e7. Now bishop c4. Now, you really cannot take this rook because of this. And you're going to lose something here. So if let's say the queen moves, this is taken. And let's say takes, and this is really like not ideal. Maybe there's even something better here actually, instead of taking that bishop. I'm not sure, but I think taking is fine, and white is still a pawn up for nothing, in a way. Maybe something like queen d5 might be a strong move, just to look at f7, defend the f pawn, and then maybe at some point you can try rook c1 and then taking, and there are some serious threats here, and it's not that simple. So that's why it wasn't taking. King b8 was played instead. Queen d3, very logical. I think white was just intending to pile up on the d file. Queen b4, hitting the b pawn. You can't play b3 because the knight falls. So bishop b3 makes sense. And now knight d4. Queen c4. Now, this is to basically force black should not be able to take this, because then in a way black liquefies the position. He has drawing chances. So this is why queen c4 was played. And now white enters this endgame where he's just a pawn up, but he has to make some progress, careful progress to actually convert this position. What's good about white's position is actually he has this extra pawn, and it's still not it's not obvious how he's going to take it back. If you try this, I think after taking you could just take and you're still a pawn up. It's really not that ideal. So rook c8 was played instead, and bishop d3, just holding the pawn. Knight c6. Now knight c6 just avoided any kind of just frees up these pieces in a way, because the knight might have been hanging. Maybe the bishop wants to move at some point. Bishop e4, very logical. I mean, this is very straightforward play. And now f3. And this bishop is rock solid. There's nothing that can touch this bishop. It's just a rock solid piece. Now f5 is truly completely defended. And after something like rook e7, just rook d1. And you can see how white's setup is just so cohesive. He doesn't have to play weird moves like if you look at what black did, like knight c6, rook e7. I mean, and then white just very simply just puts his bishop on a beautiful square. The knight doesn't have to move. The rooks are dominating the d file. It's a very nice position. I mean, this just prevents rook d7, but honestly, I think white is already much better here. I mean, he's still a pawn up. h6. Truthfully, I don't know what this move is. I don't know what black was trying to do. King f2 looks very logical. Just bring the king into the game. I mean, white's play is just so easy. I'm not sure what h6 was. I mean, maybe you're trying to prevent something like this, but it's not going to be coming for a while. Rook c7, and this is very strange play because you're very passive here. You can't even contest these rooks, and white's position is beautiful. Here Caruana played a weird move, which is rook d2. I mean, the intention is obvious. You want to play knight d5. But maybe he should have played rook d3, because at least in this case, when this is taken, at least rook takes. And this is still very strong for white. It's still a very nice position. For example, after knight e5, you can play rook d8, king a7, and now f6, and there's this very important move here. And you could just take, and then play g4, and very slowly but surely, because white gave up this pawn, he made a bunch of weaknesses here, and his king will come in and just start picking them up. It's very interesting. Maybe in some cases, I guess this is why he played a h6, so that if there was ever a position like this, the bishop would not be able to capture on h7. I guess that's the reason he played h6. But that's a really, really, a very far, he has to look very far to see that, but honestly, I think that maybe he should have prioritized something else instead of h6. But anyways, rook d2 takes, and now this is a little bit different, because now white has a weakness on c3. And this idea with f6 still exists at some point. So knight e5, the knight just wants to come in here, maybe even rook c4, and just start piling up with rook c7. So rook c1, and now f6. It's hard to actually suggest a good move. I mean, you could try knight c4, but then rook d8, and after king a7, king g3, and the king just starts marching in, and white has this very clear plan with the g4, h4, g5, maybe f6, and just trying to just break in on the king side, not h5. But yeah, the point is that white's king is going to position himself very nicely, and at some point white is going to play f6, break down the structure, and then attack this h-pawn. And these pawns will start rolling. That's the basic plan here. I mean, so knight c4 is not really working. f6 makes sense, because in a way it does stop this plan with f6. And it does secure the knight. The knight cannot be budged now. King g3 anyways. But playing f6, you gave up the square on g6. So all white has to do is just play f4, and then the g6 square is gone. So king a7. This is just preempting rook d8. Sort of buys black a move. Rook d4. Rook c5. And now king h4. And this is just to try to get the king into g6. Play f4, bring the king to g6, and basically white is doing amazing. That's why rook d4 was played to defend this bishop, so that when the knight moves, it doesn't leave this bishop hanging. So rook c7, just attacking c3. King h5, white just continues. I mean, you can't really take this pawn, because if you take it, f4 comes, the knight has to move, and now rook d7, and how are you defending g7? Also, the rook can't move off this file because bishop c6 is a real threat. Something like rook c4, okay, you just take, and g7 falls, and now this will fall, rook g6, king g7 takes, and that's it. These pawns are going to roll through. Black is just too slow on the queen side. So you can't take that pawn on c3. It is completely losing. It's not a free pawn. So b5 was played. But now f4 anyways. There's really no way to avoid this. The difference here is that at least this rook is covering g7. So the knight goes back. Now, king g6 could be played, but then knight b6. And at least this is covered. And maybe the knight will fly in and try to attack c3. Which is similar to what happened in the game. So knight d7. Rook cd1. Basically, again, he's just giving up this pawn, but you can't take it because of the knight on d7 hangs. So that's why he plays knight b6 to avoid it. Rook d3. Now knight a4. This pawn is a goner, but I think white had like this idea with king g6 in mind anyways. So he played king g6. And after the knight took, he just played bishop f3, just holding this bishop for the moment. In a lot of cases, actually, this bishop is great with the rooks, because after rook d8, rook a8, this is going to be very annoying for the king. The king would have to go to b6, and suddenly it's just a very uncomfortable position for black to play. The rooks are going to be very active. So knight takes a2, and here white is actually a pawn down. But his plan with king g6 and rook d7 is so strong that it doesn't matter. Rook d7 comes anyways. There's no way to stop g7 from falling, and then soon after h6. These pawns are just a bit too slow. Knight c3. Now takes. And now b4, so black has to try and push his own pawn to get a queen. Yes, white is going to get his own queen as well, by either taking this one, probably to run the f-pawn. And I think this was calculated all the way to the end brilliantly by Caruana when he saw that both sides get a queen. This move was just to prevent b2, so black has to play this first. The king comes closer, and after this f6, and now they both get a queen, and now queen g6. Now here Caruana, I think, thought for a bit of time, a little bit, I'm not sure. But there are only two real moves, either king e7 or queen f6, and he was trying to figure out which one is the most accurate. He found the right move, which is queen f6. The point is that after king e7, king b5, avoiding any checks and trying to step out of any crazy attack, queen h8 is a strong move, but I think that's a hard move to see, especially in this kind of position. I think Caruana instead was trying to calculate these checks and saw that the king just escapes. So it wasn't a great idea. That's why instead he played queen f6, because at least in this case, if the queens are exchanged, this f-pawn is a runner. And this pawn is still a little bit far. And at least in some way, white could try to reroute and try to hassle the black pawn. But it's still a very complex position. It's not that easy. So queen e8, he avoids the queen exchange. King d6, rook c4, rook c7, and he's just trying to get rid of this active rook. This rook has basically nowhere to go. So king b5, check, forcing a queen exchange. And now this pawn comes one square up. It's one square closer to queening. The rook was taken, But this is actually completely losing. The pawn is just going to roll through. Black has no time to actually deal with his a-pawn. Here, king d7, and I mean, there's really nothing that black can do. He just queens, and if you keep going further, it's going to be a check. And here, Radjabov just resigned. If we go back for a little bit, I think... Well, I mean, this is a great game by Caruana, but I think Radjabov's opening choice was a little bit strange. I know that he was trying to get Fabiano out of prep, but this was probably not the way to go. Because from the opening on move, literally on move, he gave a pawn up on move 14 with an exposed king, and white has good active pieces. All the pieces are on the board, and black is just a pawn down. So I'm not sure if this is the right way to play for Radjabov. I think he should have tried some sort of different setup, maybe a different approach to this. But yeah, after this, I mean, Caruana played very steadily, very easily. White's game is actually pretty simple, or at least it looks simple. I'm not a 2700, so I don't know how hard this is. But white's play looks very logical, very simple, very easy. Just secured the bishop on the square. White has a very clear plan of playing king f2, g4, king g3, king f4, something like this, and then trying to push through on the king side. And it paid off, and I think Caruana's calculation here was superb. He basically just figured out that this plan, after either... Basically, black has an issue. Either f6 comes at some point, and these pawns will be weak anyways, or if black plays f6, now g6 is gone. So I think that was the key takeaway here. And this plan was executed perfectly by Caruana. Like this move, rook d4, just defending this bishop, preparing f4 slowly. He never rushed anything. And he never gave black a chance to really recuperate. And through all this, he just played very logically, very soundly. As soon as the knight left, you can see how d7 became available. He got the king to g6, defended his bishop, and suddenly everything was just falling apart on the king side. And yes, it took some calculation to see that white... it's not quicker than black because they both get queens, but white just has a much better position after they both get queens. Because this king is too exposed, and white's pieces are very well placed, along with this king. Black's pieces, on the other hand, are not really coordinating. This queen also hits the rook. So I think here it was just like a matter of converting this position. Just trying to get rid of black's good pieces and try to start pushing this king side, which he managed to do. Like queen e5, very simple, you just bring the pawn up. And basically, black had no time to try and push his a-pawn to create any sort of counterplay. So yeah, a really good game by Fabiano, and I kind of feel bad for Radjabov. He's a really good player. I just think that he's having a tough tournament. So let's go on to the next game between Richard Rapport and Jan Nepomniachtchi. This game was also very interesting, and Nepo's going on a killing streak. He's just destroying people. I believe he's a half point ahead of Caruana in the tournament, and I think 1.5 points ahead of Nakamura, who's third. So the opening started as a Petrov, and there was a mainline Petrov with this, where white just tries to play c4 to counter black's center. It's a very simple game, usually very symmetrical. And both sides try to play with their pieces here and just try to. Usually, there's a lot of piece exchanges, but here the game actually took an interesting turn after queen b3, which is a weird move because queen b3 is usually seen after something like rook e1 and bishop f5. So now queen b3 makes sense because there's no bishop on c8, and the queen actually makes sense on b3 because it's hitting b7. So that's one idea. The other thing is, he played this move immediately, so I have to think that maybe he has something in mind here. So bishop g4, a very logical approach, just ready to take this knight. Now, you cannot take on b7 yet. It looks like a free rook, or a pawn at least. If knight d7, oh wow. I get the pawn on c6, it looks good. But actually, it's not. Here, white loses immediately. After this, there's no way to stop queen h2. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. No way to stop this move. So that's why he had to play takes on e4 first, and then knight g5. And at least in this way, he's hitting the pawn, and he's also trying to... the queen might come across at some point, not when the bishop is here, of course. But in this case, at least this pawn is... it's a little bit weak, and I think he wanted to target it. So if you try to defend it, for example, with something like bishop f5, then knight c3 is just very strong. And there's really no problems for white. I mean, maybe you could even take on b7. I'm not sure of the tactics there. But knight c3 looks more solid, and it looks a bit safer. And if rook e8, just rook e1, the pawn is going to fall. So bishop e7 takes. And now white has to decide what to do. Does he defend the knight? Does he take the pawn? Here, Rapport decided to take this pawn. And that led to a lot of different complications. So the rook is hanging, and queen takes e4 happened. Queen takes a8, and currently black is a rook down. Not a full rook. He's just an exchange down for nothing. Not nothing, but you'll see. So bishop h3, and this was Nepo's idea. He wanted to just make a draw here. After taking, you have to take this. There's no avoiding this. You have to take this. So after this, queen g6 and this, and you can go for a draw. But Rapport wanted more, and he played f3, which is interesting. So the problem here for white is that this king side is so weak. The good thing here for white is that he's up a rook for now. And Nepo here found a very accurate move, queen d3. The annotations, the color annotations problem spoiled the idea. But basically the idea is to play queen d7, to defend a7, knight h6, and this queen is trapped. That's it. Very simple. Not that easy to see, though. A lot of people might just be like, oh, okay, I'll just take this because I'm hitting the rook. Seems logical. I'm defending c6. This queen still can't escape that easily. But after king g2, there's really nothing that black can do here. Black is lost because this queen will escape to b7 or a7. So that's not working. So instead, queen d3. And the point is that, for example, after king g2, which is what was played, queen g6 is still a draw. Queen d3, and it's the same draw. This rook is hit, so the queen has no time to escape. Now, basically, what would happen if, for example, instead of queen g6 here, what if queen d7 was played immediately? Well, now, actually, white can escape with bishop e3 because a7 is hanging. So that doesn't work for black. Black is losing. He's down material. So that can't be rushed. That's why queen g6 is a draw. That's the only way to play forward. And after queen d3, knight d2 is played by Rapport. And now queen d7 is different because now bishop e3 is not a real threat. So what does white do? He just plays knight e4 and gives up his queen. Now if we look at the material count, it's 2 rooks versus a queen, and after bishop f4, queen takes h3. I'm going to clear all annotations actually. I guess I can't clear it with the colors, but that's okay. Like I've said before, which Leash has had a setting that could just let you clear all the colors without the annotations. So queen takes h3, and it's 2 rooks, and pawns are equal, pieces are equal, and it just seems like everything's fine for white. But he has problems here because this is weak, this is weak. This queen is actually really well placed. It can't be kicked. This bishop should have been a light squared bishop probably, to at least try to defend f3, maybe some other light squares. But it's just not a great position for white to play. White is going to struggle defending this position. So rook a d1, it seems very logical. And now h6. And the idea, I think, was to just try to give this king an escape square, but also maybe prepare g5 at some point, maybe g4, just try to break things open. So that's why bishop g3 was played, just to take away black's tempo, or not tempo, but take preempt this move g5. So knight c5 was played, and then rook fe1. Now, Nepo here played knight e6. He could also just take this. This is also a reasonable way to play. And here, white is still much worse because his queen is, again, well placed. h5, h4 is coming to kick the bishop, and the queen might just completely annihilate the white pawns. It might just go around picking them up like this. It might go completely around, try to pick up the queen side. The queen is like a very good piece for trying to pick off weaknesses. The rooks aren't so good at doing that. So, but that was possible. Instead, he played knight e6 just to keep more pieces on the board, which makes a lot of sense to me. Now a3. This just prevents bishop b4. And now h5. A very pretty evil move. It's a good move. Just preparing h4 to attack f3, and it will disturb the position of this bishop. So that's why rook d3 was played, to defend f3. Queen f5. Again, f3 is hit. After b4, which tries to prevent knight c5 or bishop c5, Nepo here played h4, which is a great move. If this is taken, knight f4 is a really annoying move. Because suddenly the knight just hops into the game. It's beautifully placed. The bishop is going to get kicked around. And the knight might come in here. And it's just a very uncomfortable position for white to play. So that's the idea. So bishop b8 instead. He's trying to pick off the a pawn. Nepo just ignores it. Just plays knight g5. This threatens this. And there's no rook f1 because of queen takes. So that's not working. So rook e3. And now takes. In this case, I think you can play rook f1. This is a little bit different. And that's an annoying pin. So that's not good. So that's what he took here. And now queen f2, and the queen enters the second rank. The queen is activated. Of course, if takes and just check, and black is just going to crush white. So that's not working. So f takes, queen f2. Queen is very active, and h3. This was played because he has to stop h3 from happening. If h3 happens, then there's really no good way to stop something like queen g2. If rook g3, then at some point, I mean, you could just take this rook, obviously, but you can't really defend the threat of h3 and queen g2. It's a very strong threat, so h3 has to be played. Now bishop e7, he brings in the last piece into the game. Bishop g5 is a real threat. There's really no way to stop this. You can't even play bishop f4. There's nothing to do. So bishop h2, bishop g5 hitting the rook, and now bishop g1. If something like this, I'm pretty sure that check is just good because this pawn is falling. So bishop g1, queen d2. The queen still remains on the second rank. It's very annoying. Rook e2, queen d3, looking at h3, looking at a3. Now bishop e3. He can't even play rook e3 because the bishop is covering everything. So it's really annoying to hold this. Bishop e3 tries. Now a very calm move, bishop e6, bishop f6. The bishop can hop around this way. It can hop around this way. If it lands on g3, I mean, that's a very strong square. So bishop takes a7. Queen takes h3. Queen g3. And now h3. And this is just a completely winning plan here. There's no way to stop this. This pawn will just go to h2 and maybe h1. Maybe. Obviously to h1. I mean, there's nowhere else it would go. Bishop g1 tries to stop that. And after bishop h4, here Rapport resigned. Basically, there's no way to stop h2. If you play something like rook f2, then h2. And that's a good game. You can't take this because obviously mate. And there's nothing to do. If you take with the rook, this is also going to be disaster. So that's not working. And there's really no alternative for white. So again, a really good game by Nepo. I mean, Rapport, I think, pressed too hard, and maybe he just overlooked in this position. Maybe he overlooked that. First of all, I think maybe he knew this was a draw, but maybe he just didn't. He just underestimated how strong Queen D3 is. And there's really no way to actually get this queen out. You don't have time for it. The rook is hit. Queen G7 is threatened. So there's no time for this. And maybe Rapport should have just accepted a draw. I think he's playing for a win because I think he's like in the bottom half of the tournament, so he has to play for a win here. And Nepo just converted this very nicely. He had no problem converting this position. It's hard to suggest any improvements for white because white's position is just so difficult to defend. Even like exchanging here is not as accurate. Like it's still very good. Like black still has a great game, and this plan with like pushing the H pawn is a great idea. I mean, black just has a field day here. He could even try G5 if he really wanted to. Some things like that, it's just a very annoying position for white to play. And here, white just could not do anything about avoiding. He could not avoid exchanges, and this pawn was an extreme weakness. So it's very hard for white to actually untangle here, to defend everything and not exchange pieces, and keep his pieces active. And like the king is so solid, the black king is so solid, and this queen is very active. Once it enters the second rank, it's basically game over. I mean, black just needed to get his last piece in the game, and very nicely Nepo just converted this. I mean, bishop e3, I mean, he can't really do anything here. That's the problem. He's running very low on moves. Something like this. You could even try to exchange pieces here, just slowly pick off these pawns. And it's going to take a lot for these rooks to activate. But yeah, a really great game by Nepo. And again, a really great game by Caruana as well. So that's it for round 7. Currently in the lead is Nepo with 5.5. Behind him is Caruana with 5. So it's a very tense tournament between these two people. Truthfully, Nepo is playing some really good chess, and I think that his opponents press too hard against him, and that's why they suffer. But anyways, see you next time. Thank you for watching. Feel free to leave a comment or any sort of suggestions. This channel is new, so I'm happy to take any sort of advice. I love doing this. I love analyzing these games. All right, so take it easy. See you in the next round. Bye.